On this week's Entrepreneurs at Scale podcast, I'm thrilled to be joined by Nick Goldberg, the founder and CEO of Ezra Coaching. Ezra Coaching is a digital coaching platform that provides executive and leadership coaching. After serving in a number of learning and development companies, Nick started his own company and introduced coaching to his team and began to see the power in how it helped the team unleash their leadership skills to drive results. Whether it's in the sports field or in the boardroom, everyone can benefit from having a coach to grow and to make the most of their talent. I think I'm right saying Ezra's mission is to bring the superpower of coaching to every professional in every workplace. As a fellow coach, I'm delighted to welcome you to the show, Nick. To start with, Nick, just to tell us about a bit more about Ezra and what exactly is you do.
Sure. Firstly, great to be here, and thanks for having me, Neil. Ezra, coaching, and for those of you listening, coaching is typically a one-to-one conversation between a professional and an individual to really support that individual in becoming the most effective they can be. And prior to Ezra, it was only really ever reserved for the most senior people in organizations. Typically C-suite, maybe a little bit the level below, but it was only ever given to the most senior people. Yeah, coaching can have even more impact, in my view, throughout all the levels of an organization and, quite frankly, all the individuals in the world. And our mission 4 or 5 years ago when we started this business was, how do we find a way to give coaching to more people in a very seamless fashion? And also, we knew that our primary market would be the B2B market. And in the B2B market, we knew that organizations buying coaching would need ways of measuring the impact. When any organization is buying anything, especially in today's world, the first thing they ask is, does this provide value to my company? Do I see a return? So when we built Ezra, we always had one eye on how we could prove out the value of what we do. So coaching individuals across the world and helping organizations prove out the impact, and ultimately bettering companies too.
So what got you into all this? What suddenly got you into setting up Ezra? What was the insights you saw? What big decisions do you take to change?
Yeah. So prior to Ezra, I had the pleasure of being the CEO of quite a large organization in the UK and Ireland. And we did two things there. One was something called outplacement. So we helped organizations when they were laying off staff. We helped those individuals find new work through, actually, one of the things was coaching, but there were a whole load of other services we offered there. And the other thing that we did in this organization was we offered that service I just described. We offered executive coaching to executives, very high price points, but really did provide incredible value. And what led me to Ezra actually was two things. Kind of three things really. Firstly, at LHH, my previous organization where I was the CEO, one of the things I passionately believed in and still believe in is developing my own people. And we had this unique benefit that we could give all of our own staff a coach. And in those days, everyone was in the office and, 5 days a week. It's hard to imagine that happened, but that's what happened. And people came in every day and all of our staff worked on the ground floor and all of our coaches delivered the services to the clients on the first floor. Imagine kind of like a doctor's surgery with 50 cubicles and 50 coaches. And what we did is we gave our own staff access to coaching. So whenever they needed support, they would just go upstairs, see who was free, and then they would go and see that coach to help them. And that was, individuals, first line managers, right the way through to executives. And I saw the power that it had on everybody and felt very strongly that we could offer this. If we could offer this to individuals in our clients and organizations, we'd have a really good business. And the second thing was I'd had a coach. So I was a fairly young CEO, slightly maybe out of my depth. and my organization gave me a coach to help maybe close some of the gaps, give me more confidence, give me more self-belief in what I was trying to achieve. And really, my coach, Gary, who's still my coach for the last, I think it's now 11 years, has been a massive influence on me in my career. And that obviously had an impact on my desire to share that with the world. And then the final thing, just in terms of the digital nature, I remember 5 years ago, picture exactly where I was. I wasn't feeling very well. My partner probably said I had man flu. I thought I was dying. And I couldn't get out. So I downloaded an app called Babylon Health, which is a kind of online GP service, and downloaded the app. Within about 10 minutes, saw a doctor. They told me to just, as they always do, stay in bed and rest and whatever. But I think they might have even given me antibiotics because I really said I needed them. And within about 10 minutes, they'd sent me a prescription. I literally went downstairs to the pharmacy, picked up the prescription. I thought, wow, what an incredible service that is. And I thought, if I can do that with a doctor, then why can't we do that similar thing with a coach? I met the doctor online. I had a face-to-face conversation a bit like we're having now, Neil. And I thought, surely we can make this available through coaching. So that inspired, if you like, the digital nature of how we then built Ezra.
A lot of disruption, I imagine, comes from being able to solve a problem, or like Babylon Health maybe done, just make it easy, the whole process, take away the friction and all those sort of things. So what would you describe as some of the sort of barriers to your growth in those early formative years? What were the challenges that you had to front up to?
Yeah, I mean, there were a few challenges. The first, and it's interesting now, but the first challenge we faced was, there were two. Firstly, we needed to reduce the price in order to provide coaching at more junior levels. We had to charge less, in very simple terms. And in order to charge less, if you think about it, I mean, we're not just a middleman, because we have so much more to our service, but ultimately our coaches are subcontractors, and we needed to find ways in which we could give those coaches a really enriched living, but not necessarily pay them the same per hour that that had happened in the past, because that was one of the reasons that was driving this very, very high price. So what did we do? We were lucky because when we started, we were incubated out of a very large executive coaching company, and we had access to 2,000 coaches. And we met those coaches and we asked them, what do you want? Interestingly, Neil, I know you're a coach and you were telling me before, you live in Herefordshire. It's very typical that coaches have moved out of major cities, whether that be London, New York, Toronto, Singapore, into different parts of the country. One of the reasons that the cost was so high is because they would charge for travel as part of their rate. Yeah. So if we could take out all the travel cost, could we find a way of essentially saving that money, passing that saving on to the customer? But also at the same time, what our coaches really wanted was a higher volume of work. So how could we give them more volume of work? And then how could we also give them a sense of community? Because it can be quite lonely being a coach. And they wanted that development, they wanted that community. So if we could give them community, ease, and higher volume of work, how could we break that challenge? So that was our first challenge to overcome. And interestingly, a lot of people told me it will never work. But I think 95% of the coaches we ever spoke to were said, this is too good to be true. Of course we can. Yeah. And the second challenge we had, and again, it's hard to imagine this right now, but the second challenge that we had was 4 years ago, when you went to a customer like McDonald's, that was our first ever customer, and you said, we've got this idea to do coaching virtually. They said, what do you mean? People don't meet face to face? And we said, no, we can do like the Babylon Health example. And I would always use that example at the beginning. I said, you can now see your doctor on virtual conferencing calls. Why can't you have a coaching conversation? So pre-pandemic, one of the challenges we had to overcome was that people could have really valuable, insightful conversations virtually. And obviously now that is just not, that's just never, ever even near the surface of a challenge. But back then, I remember specifically a bank in Canada and actually one of the biggest sportswear companies in Western part of America saying, no, never going to work. People can't do virtual conversations. And this is, and don't get me, this is before we all got used to it. So they were the two main objections. How do we get the right level of coach to be able to scale this affordably for customers? And the second was, can this be done virtually?
Yeah, like any organization, figuring out your value proposition and getting that really rooted, I suppose, is to be able to get that done. Then you can obviously start to scale your organization. Another element of scaling an organization is, I guess, is really getting clear in terms of the culture that you want to bring about. Describe, if I were to walk into the new offices in London, or anywhere around the world for that matter, Nick, what was the culture like at Ezra now, and how have you gone about reinforcing that?
Yeah, so I mean, and I know it's cliche, but I genuinely believe it and mean it. We are nowhere. This business does not work. And any entrepreneur building a company with 2 people or 20 people or 200 people, if your culture isn't right, then people don't develop great product. They're not passionate when they're sat in front of a customer. They don't go out of an evening and talk with their family about the wonderful place that they work, and their family see opportunities and so on, meet networks. I mean, there is so much to be said about an engaged workforce, and therefore putting our culture first before anything is critical, has been critical in this journey. And I'm sure we'll talk about it, but as we've gone from 2 of us to 20 of us to now nearly 400 of us, it's evolved and it's changed. And it becomes harder to nurture and harder to keep, and that's been a challenge. But how does it, in answer to your question, how does it feel? So we have core values at Ezra. Those values were created quite early on, and they've actually held strong throughout. We created our values early on.
How did you do that, by the way?
How did we do that? So at the time, I remember there were 25 of us. It was COVID. We asked the question, we actually said it was in 3 years' time, when we are supporting thousands of individuals and impacting their lives and their organizations, and we have a thriving company, what will it feel like to work at Ezra? And what are the core values that will not only get us there, but live beyond there after? And we sat around as a group, and I remember it was a Zoom call because we were global from the beginning. And we went into rooms. We kind of got a sense of what the things were, and if you think then we categorized them into 5 or 6 areas, and then we actually went to a company, a great company, a shout out to them because they're still our partners today, called the Schwa. Or Schwa, maybe not the Schwa, tell me I'm in trouble for that. And they helped us finesse the language into something that was a bit more catchy than teamwork, integrity, your standard things. And we came out with our values, and those values have held strong right up until an email I wrote last night. Whenever we communicate with the business, whenever we run all hands, whenever we do stand-ups, our values are core. I think our staff now talk about them. Yes, we have them on t-shirts, we have them on mirrors in our offices, but they are lived and breathed. All of them are relevant. It's really interesting. When I'm sat in leadership team meetings and we can't make a decision, about A or B, we say, well, for example, if we look at our value of keep it simple, which one keeps it simple? I'll give you a good example. Our app and our technology. We've built an application ultimately that is a platform that facilitates the matching, scheduling, and delivery and feedback of a coaching session, of a coach and a coaching session. There are probably 50 other things we could add to the app. We could add more assessments, we could add more content, we could add really cool different features. But whatever we add creates friction in the process. And ultimately, what we're trying to do, and it's our CTO, Sean, who is so passionate about this, he always says to the team, guys, what are we trying to do? We're trying to encourage the coachee to match, schedule, and have a session. Is that going to help that process? And often the answer is no. I mean, sometimes it is, because sometimes those things improve, but the temptation, most new staff that join Ezra, and we encourage this, it's a big part of our culture. We have a value called push positively, which essentially says, we don't know all the answers. There are always different ways of doing things at Ezra, and you can bring that to the table. And most of the time, people come in with different ideas on how we can create the app. And don't get me wrong, some of those things have become part of our application, but a lot of the time it's kind of adding more stuff. And where I talk about keep it simple is that value, we always go back to it, and it's held strong. And, we just had feedback from one of the biggest companies in the world who were trying our app and a competitor's app as part of a process, a bidding process. And they said, we loved your app because it's just the most straightforward, and people don't have time for, 9 different steps and 8 different assessments. They just want to get on and book a session. So our value that we created 4 years ago has probably helped us win this bid. So, living your values, really living them, and not, I've seen other organizations do a big launch, stick them on the wall, talk about them, and then 6 months later, they're just gone. They're just no. It's more like we have to create values as an exercise because our staff wants to do that. So they do it, and they do it really well, and they create a big fanfare, but then they're never to be seen. Whereas what you have to do, whether you're 2 people, 20 people, 400 people, is really live them. I mean, one thing I would say is, is there an opportunity some point in this process? And I don't know the answer. I'm open to it, that one of our values might change, or we might add a value, because as you grow, things do evolve and things do change. So there is a debate right now, and I appreciate there is a debate right now, more so if we add a value for this next phase of growth that we're going through, because our business does evolve and change, and our culture does too.
Yeah, exactly. I love that story, that you turning to your values to help you make a significant business decision, and that should inform a lot of your thinking, if they are the right values. And I think it was Einstein who said simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And again, I think many people grow out in an organization, we tend to make things more difficult, more complicated, put more friction in. So I think it's a beautiful story. I'd like to turn a bit more now to talent. I think one of the things that most folk are finding the most difficult right now is, how do you go about finding great talent? You've obviously, I heard you say, get out to about 400 colleagues now. How do you go about attracting and recruiting talent, Ezra?
Hardest thing, definitely the attracting, developing, retaining, and sometimes you make mistakes as well. It's probably the most important thing for any business to do, because your people ultimately are what, especially in our business, they're what build what we do. They go out and find our customers, they look after our customers, they come up with the new ideas. So it's critical. How do we do it? So firstly, I'd say, and it's a genuine belief how important our culture is. So, showing the world what our culture is has been a big part of attracting talent. So we do a lot of employer value proposition video. We interestingly now, which you could argue goes for and against us, in London and Toronto and New York and Singapore and Sydney, we have people come to the office. Our staff come in typically 2 or 3 days a week, and the office is you asked me what it feels like to walk into the office. If you walk into our office typically on a Monday or a Thursday or a Wednesday, there is an energy and a vibe and a real openness and a real non-hierarchical, not everybody sits out in the open. People learn from one another, people banter with each other, people share ideas. And I think that when we bring people in, I think that they can feel it and they can see it. And the challenge is, and it's a marketing challenge, how do you get that feeling that you've created across? And also, people, depends on what role they are, but we work with Microsoft and Netflix and AstraZeneca and Starbucks and some of the biggest companies in the world. And for prospective staff, that can also be a attraction, to come and work for a company that has clearly got a value proposition. Yeah. So this is a pretend story, but last week, if we were trying to hire somebody that we really wanted, and we were trying to win a client that we really wanted, and we lost both, I am more frustrated and disappointed by losing the talent than I am losing the client. And I think that's a good anecdote to share, the amount of effort and time that I want our team and me to put in winning great new staff, because one member of staff can ultimately help us retain, expand, win, generate new ideas of 50 customers rather than losing one customer. So I wouldn't, a sales pitch is wrong, because it sounds like we're hard selling someone to come to our business, but we do put a lot of thought and effort into how we're attracting, how we're recruiting. Our recruitment team are the shop window of our business. That they can often be, how they are working with prospective candidates is really important. So I think that any entrepreneur looking to develop staff, don't treat an interview process as just another thing in the day. If you have an interview with a candidate that you're really interested in bringing on board, and you have a client pitch that day, they're both as important as each other. Yeah. And I think that is where I've seen other companies, when I was in the market myself, go wrong. And by the way, that also goes for when a candidate doesn't get a job. And I'm sure there'll be people listening to me and saying, well, I didn't get a job at Ezra and I didn't get, a great service, but I can tell you, we try every single time as hard as we can to make that process as good as possible, because it's critical. It's critical to bringing people on board. And that's before we get onto retaining them, but certainly attracting them is, great employer value proposition, and treating the interview as importantly as other stuff in your day is critical.
Good advice. Yeah, and I think, again, you mentioned also that it's probably part of the marketing function now, as much as attracting new potential clients, is the marketing function is about attracting talent to you as well. I really picked that out from what you're saying there. So you're just about to bring on now about, I think when you started out, Ezra, the importance of developing and coaching your team. How does that look like? How does that feel like in Ezra now?
Yeah, so I mean, our own, it's interesting. We I'm sure you're not surprised, but every single one of our staff has an Ezra coach.
Yeah.
Which is quite, none, I think we've got 1 or 2 customers that give every single member of staff a coach. It's still, it's our big, hairy, audacious goal, but it's still few and far between. We give every single person a coach. Interestingly, we also give their friends and family a coach. So when you work at Ezra, not only do you get a coach, but you get 1 license to give per year to one of your friends or family. And it's quite funny, actually. You see people give it to their spouse, their mum, their dad, their kids, their friends, and then they get to see the impact firsthand that coaching has in their life. You know, if you give it to your wife and your wife has a coach and your wife becomes happier, gets a promotion, becomes more effective at work overall, then you see firsthand what it does. So just that's not really what you asked me, but that's just an interesting thing that we do.
Well, it is, and I think declaring sort of an interest that, as we mentioned earlier, that our daughter works for Ezra, I might just have to pick her up on whether or not I could benefit.
Yeah, exactly.
From having a coach.
But how do we develop them? So firstly, we give them all a coach.
Yeah.
We are doing our best, and again, it's a challenge when you grow so fast and you scale. We've created an organization. We've grown from, I think, 6 of us year one, then 30, then about 200 last year. So we had a big growth from 30 to 200, and then 200 to 400. And with that comes massive career. It's quite, I wouldn't say it's easy, but because you're growing so fast, naturally there are promotions and more senior positions, because someone who was here in 2022 as an individual contributor, now that team's become much bigger and there's a natural management position available. And the person who we give opportunities to our staff, and there are so many examples of career moves at Ezra where people can move every 6, 8, 12 months from one job to another. So in a growing startup, there's huge opportunity for people to develop and take new jobs. What actually is interesting is, as you move into probably now, so in the last 8 months, it's not that we're not growing our customer base or our support as much, but we're starting to level out the number of employees that we have, and we're not going from 400 to 800. It's now starting to become a little bit more, I'd say, rash. I can't think of the right word without saying the wrong thing. We're trying to just become a bit more sensible about how we're growing, and what that creates a slightly different culture. And we have a culture where you pretty much could move jobs every 6, 8 months, and that might now evolve, and we have to think really hard about how we can develop people without giving them a new job every 6 to 8 months. So something we're figuring out right now. It's the next phase of our scale.
What do you call that as the biggest challenge that you've had as you scaled Ezra?
The biggest challenge is that when you are in your first year or two, 100% growth is well, for us anyway, 100% growth, 110% growth. We did it and we got used to it, and that came with, we had a small number of people who were all close to the core, who were all close to the mission, who all worked together, collaborated, pulled their sleeves up together every single day. As you get bigger, especially, we have staff in 14 countries. As you get bigger and people become further away from the original kind of core and further out, but you still need the same level of growth and passion to grow your business, it becomes really challenging to figure out how you can still have the same level of passion and drive that you had when we were 30 from employee number 30 as you can from employee number 350. That and employee number 350, we're still expected by our investors to grow as fast, and growing from 0 to 1 million versus growing, I'm just making up numbers here, from 20 million to 50 million. It's a lot more. There's a lot more growth required, and to do it, you still need the mentality you had when you were 30, but now you're 350. So the challenge, and maybe I'm not explaining it that well, is the more you grow, the harder it is for your culture to live through. Think of it like a you know, like I'm in my hand, I've kind of got a circle. Like it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and everyone gets further and further away, but you still need the same passion, and that's the biggest challenge right now. And we're doing well. I think we're trying to do it, and we're constantly thinking of ideas and of how we keep that same core, that same value, our values. We always go back to our values, yeah. But it's definitely a challenge.
You mentioned a few minutes ago, big, hairy, audacious goal. I think it was coined from Jim Collins, good to great. What is your big, hairy, audacious goal, Nick? And what does the future hold for Ezra?
Yeah, our mission was and still is that every person can be better with a coach. And our you know, our value proposition is still definitely business to business. And you know, our big, hairy, audacious goal is that every large employer in the world gives everybody an Ezra coach in some fashion. You know, we've just developed a new service offering. So Ezra has essentially 3 offerings. We're able now, interestingly, from where we started during the pandemic, we did start a service for executives. So we have a solution called Ezra X that supports the most senior people in organizations. So we can now support right at the top with coaches and services that people would expect there. We have our Ezra proposition that we've created from the beginning that really helps people scale Ezra, and it democratized coaching. But then what we did about 6 months ago is developed a proposition that enabled large organizations like Microsoft and to give development, not really coaching, but coaching is a part of it, but to give one-to-one development to literally thousands of people, because the price point enables them to give it to thousands of people. And what it does is it just focuses their development in one area. So, you know, how could we do that? Well, one way we could do that was to give people, okay, you know, I'll give you an example. You know, companies struggle with performance management every year around March, April time. If they could have 3 coaching sessions around that area with some really clever AI-driven content, how could that help them? So we developed this solution called Focus. So my point, our big, hairy, audacious goal is that because we can now support organizations at every level of their life cycle, every moment that matters in a company, that every company in the world uses one of those or all of those. And you know, we're on that journey, and you know, touch wood, we seem to be getting a lot right every month, every quarter, and long may that continue. But core to that, and you know, I feel like I'm a bit of a gardener at times. You know, you've got to nurture and continue to grow your garden, your culture, because if you don't, looking at my garden now, you know, if you just leave it, especially if it gets bigger and bigger, it doesn't grow itself. No. So nurturing it has to stay core. And I consider my job now, as we've gone from kind of product development in sales to now kind of figuring out how to continually nurture our culture.
Amazing. Yeah, I think often it is like becoming the chief culture officer. It's where you feel as a CEO. Nick, how do you stay on top of your game? How do you keep sharp?
It's a very poignant question. I say that firstly, I have a coaching session every other week.
Yeah.
Really important. Really, really, really important. I don't work weekends. Never. I mean, certainly in the last 2 years, I Friday night put my phone away. Apart from for my football on the weekends, I generally don't get out my phone.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I do is at least once, and I try twice a year, I go on holiday, and I have 2 young children, and I go on holiday and I don't take my phone. I don't actually take it at all. And I go away sometimes for 2 weeks without a phone. So there is no temptation. I have a fantastic leadership team that run the business. And it's a bit like think of it like my brain is like any muscle. my brain literally switches off from work for 2 weeks. I can't do the check it in the morning, put it in the safe, forget about it all day, then get it out at night. Like I just don't have the capacity to do that in my head, because if I see something in the morning and then thinking about it all day, and I'm not the magician with my kids at the table, I'm not playing silly games in the swimming pool because I'm worried about work. So I leave my phone at home, and I feel the benefit when I get home. I feel the benefit when I get back to work. Like I genuinely feel like I've recharged. Got space. I've got more creative, and I'm kind of like, I'm ready for the next 6 months before my next mini kind of switch off.
Well, battery recharge. I think again, the business depends on leaders to be fresh, to be able to have that thinking time, to be creative. And I think being able to properly download and recharge the batteries is so important. I think it's a really, really good point that people can take away from that. I'm not sure everyone could do it. I think there's so many folk now who are would have kind of a
I know, and I must first 2 days of these trips, I'm like cold turkey. Like I would say one trick I've done though, trick I do have is I bought myself a £30 Nokia, and it's a phone that only does phone calls like we used to have. So there's no internet on it. There's no WhatsApp. There's no social. There's no email. So firstly, it sounds weird, but I have it in my hand. Doesn't give me any distraction because it doesn't do anything, but it's just something to hold. And secondly, if there's an absolute emergency, which has never happened before, but someone can call me. And sometimes you just need a phone on holiday to phone a restaurant or phone your wife, or you do need a phone, but it doesn't have. And I think that's like my method or coping mechanism to be able to do it, is my little yellow £30 Nokia that comes out every holiday. I bought myself a camera because the next thing that people say is, how do you take photos? There are these things called cameras that we had in the olden days that you can take pictures with, and they're really good. So a Nokia and a digital camera.
If you had your time over again and were just to offer yourself one bit of advice, what would it be?
I grew up with entrepreneurs. My dad was an entrepreneur, and I still, for some reason, went into the corporate world. And to some extent, the way that Ezra is I am still part of a large corporate, but I am, able to run Ezra fairly autonomously, and we have, great support, huge support from the Adecco group. But I'm also able to run it. I think if I had my time again, I'd have probably gone down I'd probably had more courage to do something earlier on, and maybe risked some of the lifestyle gains you get in the corporate space to do this earlier.
Very good. And final question: what book are you reading at the moment, or podcast are you listening to?
It's a great question. I'm reading Simon Sinek, Why, and that is he's a great straight talker on leadership, and really like what he's doing. The other book I just finished actually is the Amazon story. From zero to that. There's 2 books. The first book around how they went from nothing to where they were. It's a really great story about disruption, challenging the status quo, which I loved, and gave me a lot of inspiration actually.
Do you remember the name of it?
Yeah, I think it's Amazon Unbound.
Unbound. Okay, no, it's all right. We'll make sure we put it in the show notes. So
I'll send you I'll send you, because there's 2, and I can't remember what the first one was called and the second one was called.
But I think again, all leaders tend to be readers, and I think that's an important area of just keeping on top of your game and being able to be curious enough to learn from others, which often you can do if you're looking at those biographies. Nick, thank you so much for joining us on today's Entrepreneurs at Scale podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure and delight listening to your story. Hopefully those listening can take inspiration from it.
I hope so. Really nice to meet you, Neil. Thanks.